The idea was born at 11 minutes past 4 on a Tuesday, in a room with no windows, and I am the one who wrote it down. I want that on the record before anything else, not because I am proud of it, because for 11 years afterward, whenever somebody at a dinner table said, "Were you there? Were you actually in the building that night?" I have watched people arrange their faces into the expression they think I want, which is sympathy, and I have had to say, "No, don't do that. I wasn't a bystander. I held the pen." My name is Nell Coburn. At the time I was 27 years old and I was the junior researcher on Vance at 9 asterisk, which was, for a decade, the most watched live program in the Kingdom of Eldermore. 9 o'clock, 6 nights a week, out of Studio 4 at Cadence House on the Meridian Network. 11 million pairs of eyes on a good night. Odile Vance behind the desk with her sleeves pushed up and her reading glasses pushed into her hair, and the whole realm, farmers, ministers, dockhands, duchesses, watching a woman take the day apart with her bare hands and hand it back to us funnier than she found it. She was brilliant. I need you to understand that first, or none of the rest of it will make sense. People who only know the clip think she must have been a bully with a good producer. She wasn't. She was the fastest mind I have ever sat in a room with, and she was funny the way water is wet, without effort, without warm-up, all the time at 4 in the morning in a corridor with a cold coffee, funny. She had come up out of nothing, out of a 2-room flat above a tannery, and she had built her whole life out of not being intimidated by anything. Grand men, grand houses, grand ideas. She walked into every room in the realm as if she had paid for it and found the carpet disappointing. That is the thing about her that mattered in the end. Odile Vance could not be impressed. It was her armor and her instrument, and I have come to think her wound. So, 11 minutes past 4 on a Tuesday. The pitch meeting for the 10th anniversary broadcast. 12 of us around a table, the head writer Sim Auberon peeling an orange he never ate, the executive producer Gerald Pike doing arithmetic on his cuff. We had 2 weeks and no centerpiece. We had run through everything: a chancellor, an admiral, a woman who had swum the narrow sea, a comic she'd have eaten alive in 4 minutes. Odile put her heels on the table's edge and said, to the ceiling, "Get me a statue." Nobody knew what she meant. She loved that. She let it sit. One of the guards, the palace, the red coats and the great fur hats, book me one of the men who stand at the gate. She tipped her head back further, thinking. The realm has been walking past those men for 400 years, and nobody has ever asked one of them a single honest question. Nobody has ever made one of them say asterisk anything. They just stand there and we take pictures of them, and the whole thing is treated like a mountain, like it's weather, like it's just there and nobody's allowed to poke it. Pike said carefully, "They don't do television." "Everybody does television, Gerald." She swung her feet down. "That's the whole point. That's the asterisk joke asterisk. They don't talk, they don't move, they don't blink, and if they asterisk did asterisk if one of them cracked on live air in front of 11 million people." She spread her hands like she was releasing a bird. "That's the anniversary show. That's the clip they play at my funeral." She was already up and walking, which was how she wrote, and the writers were already scribbling, and Sim Auberon was already saying something about a countdown clock, and I remember with a clarity I would give a great deal to be rid of that. I laughed, and I wrote in my notebook in my own hand in blue ink, "Get a guard, break him on air." And I underlined it twice, because I was 27 and I wanted to be useful. The household regiment's liaison office is a single room over an archway on the east side of the palace, and it smells of boot polish and old paper, and faintly of horses, though the horses are 3 streets away. They gave me a chair. The chair had been there since before my grandmother was born, and it did not care whether I sat in it. Major Aldous Finch was the regimental adjutant. He was 60, gray as a gull, and he had the manners of a man who has been polite to more difficult people than me on worse days than this one. "No," he said. "Major." "No, thank you for coming." I had prepared for this. I had prepared a whole architecture for this. I talked about the public. I talked about the young. I talked about how the regiment was seen as a relic and how 11 million people watching a guardsman speak plainly for 8 minutes might do more for recruitment than 100 parades. He listened to all of it with his hands folded, and when I ran out he said, kindly, the way you'd tell a stranger their coat was on fire. Miss Coburn, I have seen your program. I have seen what your employer does to a man in 8 minutes. You are not asking me to lend you a soldier. You are asking me to lend you a target. I want to say I argued. What I actually did was sit there with my ears burning, because he was right and we both knew he was right, and there was nothing to be gained by pretending otherwise. And then, and I have thought about this for a very long time, he did not throw me out. He got up and went to the window, and he looked down into the courtyard where 2 men were carrying a folded flag between them like something asleep, and he said, without turning round, "How much of your broadcast is charitable appeal?" I blinked, sorry. "Your anniversary program, 90 minutes live, how much of it is appeal?" There's usually a slot, 4 minutes, maybe 5, a cause, the network likes it, it's near the end. 4 minutes, he said, to 11 million people. He stood there so long I thought I'd been dismissed and hadn't noticed. Then he came back, sat down, and squared a folder on the desk that had been there the whole time, and I understood that Major Aldous Finch had known exactly what he was going to do to me before I ever walked in. "The Guards Benevolent Fund," he said, "keeps a house at Ashfold. 81 men live there. Some of them are very old. Some of them are not old at all and will not stand again without help, and 1 or 2 of them will not stand again at all. The fund pays for the house, the physicians, the fires in winter, and the burials. Its patron is Princess Adela. Its endowment was written in a century when a crown bought more than it does now, and this year, for the first time, the fund will not meet its costs. The Treasury has been asked. The Treasury has answered." He looked at me. "The Treasury has a great many things to pay for that people can see." The room was very quiet. Somewhere below, a sergeant was counting. "So," Finch said, "here is my counteroffer, and it is the only one I have. You may have a guardsman. 1. He will sit in your chair and answer your questions, and he will do it because at the end of it you will give the fund the appeal, the full slot, not a card on the screen, not a name read out over the credits. The appeal, in writing, from your network. And if the terms are broken, he stands up and walks out, and you may explain the empty chair to 11 million people." I said I'd have to ask. "You will," he agreed, "and they will say yes because they want him more than they want their dignity, and because they think they are buying a fool." He opened the folder. "They are not." I met Color Sergeant Owain Marsh 3 days later, in the mess corridor at Ashfold, and my first thought was that they had sent me the wrong man. I had built him in my head, you see. I'd built a slab of a thing, 7 feet of scarlet and fur, jaw like a gate. What came down the corridor was a man of ordinary height in shirt sleeves with a dishcloth over one shoulder, 44 years old, brown hair going gray at the sides, a nose that had been broken and set by somebody in a hurry, and a face so calm it was almost boring. Then he stopped walking, and I understood. I have spent my life around people who cannot stop moving. Presenters, politicians, comics, people whose bodies are always negotiating with the room, shifting weight, touching hair, buying half a second. When Owain Marsh stopped, he stopped entirely. His hands came to rest and stayed rested. There was no fidget in him anywhere, no leak, no fizz. It was not tension. That's what I had not expected. I had expected a held breath, and instead I got something closer to a hill. Standing in front of him, I found I had straightened my own back without deciding to. "Miss Coburn," he said, "Major Finch said you'd come, you'll want tea." 24 years service. He joined at 20, out of a slate town in the north where his father ran the ferry across the Wen. He had stood at the gates and in the forecourt and on the cathedral steps. He had done 4 coronation-adjacent occasions, 9 state visits, 1 royal wedding, and he mentioned this the way you'd mention a bus timetable, the lying-in state of the late Queen Mother Rosalind, 6 years back, when the realm queued for 4 days and 3 nights in the cold to walk past her coffin. He carried the tea himself. He asked about my journey. When I said something clumsy and apologetic about the program, he said, "I've seen it," and left it there in a way that closed the subject more effectively than any complaint could have. And then he took me round the house, because that, I realized much later, was the entire reason he had agreed to any of it. Ashfold Rest is a long yellow building with too many stairs and a garden that somebody has clearly fought for. 81 men. A hall with a stove in it and a table where 4 of them were playing cards with the ferocity of a border dispute. A physiotherapy room with a rail worn shiny. A corridor of doors, each with a name card, each name card in the same careful hand. He introduced me to 3 of them, and I have never forgotten a single thing about any of the 3. Callum Vay was 89 and had a beard like a chimney brush, and had stood in the ranks under 3 monarchs. He held my hand in both of his, and told me a filthy joke so old it had gone around and become respectable again, and I laughed properly, and he was delighted. Neville Hart was 61 and had 1 hand. The other had gone in an accident with a horse and a gait in a year I was not born in, and he'd stayed in another 11 years after it, in a job where you wear white gloves, which he told me about with a straight face while pouring water with an accuracy I couldn't have managed with 3 hands. And Peter Rook was 34, younger than half the writers on our show. He'd been a guardsman for 9 years, and now he was in a chair with wheels, because of something that had happened on a night in the north that he did not describe and I did not ask about. And he had the shoulders of a bull and the eyes of a man doing arithmetic he cannot make come out right, and he said, "You're the telly," and I said yes. And he said, "Right," and looked away, and I felt about 4 inches tall. In the corridor afterward, Marsh said, quietly, "The fund pays for Rook's chair. It pays for the ramp. It'll pay for the next chair when this one goes, and it'll pay for the man who comes to lift him when I'm not here to do it." "Sergeant, they're not asking anyone for anything," he said. "That's the trouble with them, they'd rather freeze." He opened a door for me. "So somebody who isn't them has to ask. 4 minutes, Major Finch says." He looked at me, and it was the first time I'd seen anything in his face that could be called an emotion, and what it was flint. "I'll sit in your chair for 4 minutes worth of asking." I said because I was young and because I still believed the story I'd been telling myself. It might not be as bad as you think. Owain Marsh considered that. "It will be exactly as bad as I think," he said. "That's not the same as being a reason not to do it." 2 days before the broadcast, Sim Auberon left the rundown on the printer and went to lunch, and I picked it up because I was the sort of person who picked things up off printers. It was headed with the show's crest and the date. The centerpiece segment ran 19 minutes, which was enormous, and under the segment heading somebody, Sim, in his big loopy hand, had written the working title. "The Blink Test." Under that a list. "Cold open, coat rack in bearskin, SGT, stick, live audience gag." Monologue, 5 men angle the realm's most expensive furniture, men who stand still for a living. Interview, 6 men push, find the crack. The test, 8 men clock on screen. Audience prize 500 crowns to anyone who makes him move. Approved provocations, horns, feathers, the Dorrit twins in tourist costume, band, strobe. Note, no contact. Legal is firm on no contact. Poll live, question TBC, something about the money. Appeal, 4 men, cut to 2 if we're heavy. Cut entirely if the test lands. I read it 3 times, standing at the printer with the machine hot against my hip. Cut entirely if the test lands. I went and found Pike in the edit suite, and I said, in a voice I didn't recognize, that we had a written undertaking with the regiment, that the appeal was the whole consideration, that we could not, and Gerald Pike, who was not a monster, who had 2 daughters and a bad back and who cried at other people's weddings, took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes and said, "Nell, it's 4 minutes for a charity. It's not the covenant of the realm." We signed. "We'll run it," he said. "Probably. Look, she's not going to be cruel to him. She's going to be *funny about the institution." There's a difference, and the difference is the only reason anybody's still watching us after 10 years. I have thought about that sentence more than almost any other sentence in my life, because Gerald believed it, and because it is exactly the thing that everybody in a building like ours believes, right up until the moment the difference stops existing. That night I sat on the floor of my flat with my notebook open at the page where I'd written "Get a guard. Break him on air" in blue ink, and I did not sleep much, and in the morning I went in and did my job. He arrived at Caden's house at 6 in the evening, 3 hours before air, in full ceremonial. The scarlet tunic, the brass, the belt, the white gloves folded and carried rather than worn, and the bearskin in a hard case under his arm as though it were a violin. 2 others came with him. Regimental Sergeant Major Dunstan Care, who was built like a cathedral door and who examined our fire exits with the air of a man planning a siege, and Major Finch, in a plain gray suit, who shook hands with everyone and remembered every name and made me feel obscurely worse. And in a small van behind them, 3 men from Ashfold. That had been Marsh's condition, not Finch's, his. "If you're going to ask the realm for money for them," he'd said on the telephone, in a tone that did not admit of discussion, "the realm can look at them first. Front row, that's not negotiable." So Callum Vey came, 89, in a blazer with his medals on it and his beard combed, gripping a stick he refused to lean on. And Neville Hart came, one-handed, in a tie he had done himself. And Peter Rook came in his chair, and I watched the runners try not to look at the ramp problem, and I watched Owain Marsh solve the ramp problem in about 9 seconds by simply picking up the front of the chair and lifting, and I watched Rook's jaw go tight, because being lifted in front of strangers costs something, and he paid it, and did not say a word. "Front row, 3 seats reserved." I put the cards out myself. The green room at Caden's house is a long, low room with bad lighting and a table of sandwiches nobody eats, and guests wait in it and slowly lose their nerve. It's designed too. Everybody in television knows it and nobody says it out loud. You leave them in there for an hour, and by the time the floor manager comes for them, they are so grateful to be moved that they will follow anybody anywhere. Owain Marsh sat down in the corner chair. He put the bearskin case at his feet. He folded his hands. And then he simply stopped. For 55 minutes. I have seen politicians in that room work through a whole packet of mints. I have seen a novelist tear a napkin into confetti and then apologize to the napkin. Marsh sat with his back straight and his eyes level and his hands still, and he did not read, and he did not look at his phone because he did not have one on him, and he did not talk, and he did not sigh, and he did not once look at the clock on the wall, and the room filled up around him with runners and sound engineers and a woman from wardrobe and a boy with a lint roller, and none of them could bear it. I watched 3 separate people go over and start conversations for no reason other than that his stillness was unendurable to them. He answered each one courteously and briefly, and then went back to being a hill. At 20 to 9, Odile came in. She never came into the green room. It was a rule, an actual rule, in an actual document. The host does not meet the guest before air, because the surprise is the product. She broke it that night, and I think I know why. I think she had watched him on the monitor from her office for the better part of an hour, and she could not stand it either, and she had to go and put a hand on it to see if it was real. She stopped in the doorway with her glasses pushed up into her hair. Everybody else in that room stood up. He did too, not fast, not eager, the way you stand when a woman comes into a room, which is a different thing and which she noticed. "Sergeant Marsh." "Ma'am." "Odile," she came in. She looked him up and down, top to bottom, with an insolence so practiced it had become a kind of art form. "That's a great deal of red." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know why you're here?" "You want to see whether I'll come apart," said Owain Marsh, "in front of a great many people." The room stopped breathing. Odile Vance's eyebrows went up an inch, and then she laughed, a real one, the short bark she gave when something genuinely surprised her, which was rare enough that the writers used to keep count. "Well," she said, "that saves us both a lot of tiresome pretending." "It does, ma'am. And I'm here because at 10 minutes to 11 you're going to give 4 minutes to the Guards Benevolent Fund," he said, "and I'd stand in a river for 4 minutes." Something moved across her face. It was there and gone. I only caught it because I was looking straight at her, and I have thought about it ever since. It wasn't anger. I'd have known anger. I saw it weakly. It was closer to offense asterisk, as though he had done something faintly improper, as though he had shown her without warning a thing that ought to be kept covered up. "Everybody wants something," she said, and her voice had cooled by about 10 degrees. "At least you're quick about it." "You asked, ma'am." "I did." She turned in the doorway, and then over her shoulder lightly, the way she threw away her best lines. "Sergeant, one friendly warning, guest to host. I've had chancellors in that chair. I've had a man who runs a bank the size of a small country. I've never once had to work as hard as they thought I would." She smiled. "Nobody's as still as they think they are." He said, "No, ma'am." She waited. He didn't add anything. That, I have since decided, was the moment the whole thing became inevitable, because Odile Vance had handed him a line and he had simply agreed with her, and there was nothing in it for her to push against, and she left that room with the distinct expression of a woman who has punched a wall and found it soft, and is now certain that something is very wrong with the wall. 9 o'clock, the band, the lights. The great howl of 1,000 people in a hot room who have been queuing since 6, and Odile Vance coming out from the wings at a walk that was almost a swagger, and 11 million households leaning back into their sofas. I stood at the back of the studio floor, behind camera 3, with a clipboard I did not need. The monologue was 5 minutes and 11 seconds, and I could recite most of it now, at this distance from memory, and I would rather not. She started gently. That was her way. She opened warm, she got everybody on her side, she made them comfortable asterisk, and then she used the comfort like a lever. "We have a very special guest tonight," she said. "A very special guest. He's from the palace." Cheer. "No, no, not one of asterisk those ones. He hasn't got a title, he hasn't got a scandal, he's not selling a book about his childhood." Big laugh. "He's a asterisk guard asterisk. He is one of the men who stand at the gate." And she let a picture come up on the screen behind her, one of ours, taken that afternoon, Marsh in the courtyard, red and black and perfectly, impossibly straight. And the audience made the noise audiences make at something familiar, and she stood there and looked up at it for a beat, and then she said, "Isn't he asterisk magnificent?" And she said it exactly right, a half-degree too warm, so that everybody knew the knife was coming, and started laughing before it arrived, which is the oldest trick there is, and it works every single time. 400 years, she said, we have had these men. 400 years of the finest tailoring in the realm, wrapped around a job description that reads, in its entirety. She consulted an imaginary card. Be there. The house came apart. I mean it, I want to be fair to them, I've read the whole thing. Be there. Continue to be there. Do not stop being there. Then a man comes and you go home. She took her glasses off. Do you know what we call people who stand at a door and don't move? We call them an asterisk door. Sim Auberon at the back of the studio was mouthing along with it. And I'll be honest with you, I have questions. I have practical questions. Because we are in this realm asterisk paying for this. It's in the accounts. It's a line item. You can look it up. I did. My researcher did. We had a whole afternoon of it. A ripple. The audience loves an audit. There is a sum of money, of the realm's money, of your money, which we hand over every year to a body of men whose contribution to the national life is that they stand still for a living. There it was, the phrase. She'd found it in the writer's room on Thursday, and she'd known it was the one. She'd said so out loud. That's the phrase. That's the whole show in 5 words. Stand still for a living, she repeated, savoring it. It's the only trade in the kingdom where you are paid not to do anything. It's the perfect job. There's no way to fail. There's no way to be bad at it. You can't have an off day. What are they going to say? Sorry, Sergeant. The standing wasn't there tonight. The crowd could feel it. I looked at the front row. That is the part I cannot get out of my head, even now, even after everything. I looked at the front row, where 3 old soldiers in their good jackets were sitting under studio lights hot enough to cook by, and I watched Callum Vey, 89 years old, laugh politely, because he was a guest and it would have been ill-mannered not to. I watched Neville Hart look at his one hand in his lap. And I watched Peter Rook, 34, in a chair, in the front row of a theater full of people being invited to find it hilarious that a man's whole life had been spent standing up. Rook didn't laugh. He looked straight ahead at the desk, and his shoulders were very still, and I understood with a lurch that has never entirely gone away that he had learned that stillness from somewhere, and that it was costing him something, right there, in seat A3, on live television, and that nobody in that building except me and 2 other men was even looking at him. They're the most expensive furniture in the realm, Odile said. Beautiful, historic, utterly, gloriously useless. And tonight, she turned to the wings and the band hit a sting. Tonight, we're going to find out what happens if you sit on the furniture. 11 million people laughed. I had written that phrase down. Get a guard, break him on air, blue ink. She brought him out in the 3rd segment. The coat rack came first because Sim had insisted, and it got the biggest laugh of the night up to that point. A hat stand in a bearskin with a scarlet jacket draped over it, wheeled onto the set by 2 stagehands. She interviewed it. She asked it about its plans for the summer. She thanked it for its service, and it did not respond, and she said, frankly, more responsive than most of my guests. And the studio roared, and behind that wall, in the wings, in the dark, color Sergeant Owain Marsh stood at attention with his bearskin on his head, and his rifle grounded, and listened to every word of it through a monitor speaker, with a fault in it that made everything sound slightly further away than it was. I was standing next to him. I could have said something. I said nothing. Then the floor manager's hand came down, and the band played the guest sting, and the great sliding door opened onto the light and the noise, and he marched out. He didn't walk. That was the first thing that went wrong for us, and none of us had thought of it. Guests walk, they lope out grinning and wave and mug and do a little embarrassed skip, and the studio understands that the person is enjoying themselves and gives them permission to be there. Marsh came out at ceremonial pace, slow, absolutely even, heel and toe and the whole body carried like a filled glass. 6 paces to the mark, halt, the boots coming together with a crack that the boom might caught and threw into 11 million rooms like a gunshot. He removed nothing. He apologized for nothing. He inclined his head to the desk, exactly the depth of the inclination and not 1 degree further, and he sat down, and even sitting down, he sat like a man at a post, back off the chair, hands on his knees, chin level. And the laughter, which had been rolling since the coat rack, got about halfway across the room and then went strange. You can hear it on the tape. I've listened to it more times than is healthy. There is a moment, about 4 seconds after he sits, where the laugh loses its footing, where the front rows stop and the back rows carry on for a second without them, and then hear that they're alone and taper off. Nobody had told them to stop. Nothing had happened. It was only that a man had come in and sat down properly, and something in a room of 1,000 people recognized it before their brains did, the way you go quiet in a great building without deciding to. Odile felt it. Of course she felt it. She felt everything in a room. It was her genius. And I watched her decide in real time, in about a quarter of a second, that she was going to make them laugh again if she had to take the place apart with her hands. "Sergeant Owain Marsh," she said warmly, leaning in, chin on her fist. 24 years in the King's Own Foot Guards. Welcome. Can I get you anything? Water? A chair with an asterisk back to it?" "No, ma'am, thank you." "Your asterisk, sure asterisk. You look like you're waiting for a bus." "I'm quite comfortable, ma'am." "That's a lie," she said, delighted. "And it's the first thing you've said, and it's a lie, and I love that because now we know where we are." And the laugh came back, and she had them, and the 8-minute clock in the corner of the screen was already loaded and waiting, and we were off. The interview was 6 minutes, and she used it the way a boxer uses the first round, not to win, but to find the seam. "Tell me about a day," she said. "An actual day. I want the whole thing. What time do you get up?" "4:30, ma'am." "4:*4*." She turned to the audience with an open hand, inviting them in. "To stand still." "To prepare, ma'am." "To prepare." She let the word hang there, absurd, until they laughed. "Prepare how Sergeant? What is it you do at 4:30 in the morning that leaves you ready to do nothing?" He answered her. He answered every question she asked him, plainly, without evasion, and he never once tried to be funny, and it was the most dangerous thing he could possibly have done, though none of us understood that yet, including him. He said boots. He said an hour on the boots and the leather and the brass and the wool and the tunic brushed by hand and the bearskin combed. He said inspection, and what happens if you fail one, and how a man is spoken to when the wool is right and the soul of it is wrong. He said the tunic weighs what it weighs. He said the bearskin weighs a little over 1.5 pounds and sits on the crown of the head, and that, after the second hour, that is not a small number. "So it's heavy asterisk," Odile said. "That's your case, it's a heavy hat." "You asked what I do, ma'am. I'm telling you." "And how long do you stand?" 2 hours on, 4 off, 2 on, depending." 2 hours without moving. "There's a sentry step, every 10 minutes or so, at the discretion of the man on post." "Ah," she said, spinning it into the room like a coin, "so you do move. There it is. I want the realm to know he moves. Every 10 minutes he takes a walk asterisk." She checked an imaginary watch. "How far, Sergeant?" 15 paces, ma'am, and 15 back." 15 paces, a great gale of it, in 2 hours. "Well, no wonder you're up at 4:30. You've got to train for that." And here is the thing that I did not expect, and that the audience did not expect, and that, I am fairly sure, Odile Vance did not expect. He waited for the laugh to finish. Completely. He did not talk over it, did not smile through it, did not do the little rueful headshake that guests do to show their good sports. He sat and let it run its course, and when it had gone all the way down to nothing and the room was waiting for whatever came next, he said, in the same level voice, "You asked about the standing, ma'am. The standing isn't the hard part." "Isn't it?" "No, ma'am." "Well," she spread her hands, all generosity, all danger. "Enlighten us." "What is?" And he looked at her, and I was 30 feet away with a clipboard I did not need, and I saw it, and he decided not to answer. You could see the decision. It went across his face, and it was gone in half a second, and what it left behind was the same calm, courteous surface as before. "It's a job like others, ma'am," he said. "It has parts that are hard and parts that aren't." And she knew asterisk. She knew she had just been given a door and had it shut in her face and something in her lit up, and she smiled the smile that everybody in the building had learned to fear, and she said, "Oh, Sergeant, we're going to come back to that." The test began at 9:41. The clock came up on the screen, 8 minutes, red, counting down, with the words she'd chosen underneath it in white capitals, and the audience read them out loud together the way an audience does. And the sound of 1,000 people chanting * the blink test is a sound I will hear on my deathbed. 500 crowns. That was the prize. 500 crowns to any member of the studio audience whose provocation made him move, a flinch, a step, a word, a laugh, a * blink out of rhythm, adjudicated by a panel consisting of Odile Vance, who was, she announced, entirely impartial and completely corrupt. He stood up. He didn't wait to be asked. He crossed to the mark they had taped on the floor at center stage, under the hottest light in the building, and he came to attention and grounded the rifle, and he became, in the space of 1 second, exactly what she had been mocking for the past 20 minutes. A man standing still, in a red coat, doing nothing. And the room went for him. They had the horns first. Air horns, a dozen of them, given out at the doors. The sound in an enclosed studio is genuinely physical. It goes through your sternum. Then the band at full, 3 feet from his ear. Then the Dorrit twins, who were a double act we'd used before, in tourist costume with cameras and enormous hats, doing the thing that people actually do at the palace gates in real life, which is to stand beside a man and pull faces at him for their friends, except with lights and 1,000 people and a live feed. One of them stood on tiptoe and put his face 6 inches from the bearskin and mimed a scream. The other did a slow, elaborate, unbelievably stupid dance, which was funny, I have to be honest. It was genuinely funny, and I laughed, and I hate that I laughed. Then the strobe, then a woman from row K who came down and sang to him. Then an 11-year-old, no, I'm misremembering, he was a young man of about 19, the youngest we'd cleared, and legal had been very firm, who read him a list of increasingly ridiculous insults off a card, which the writers had spent 2 days on. And nothing, not nothing in the sense of a man clenching his teeth and enduring it. That's what everyone in the building was waiting for. That's what makes the game work. The pleasure of it is watching someone hold on, because holding on implies that they might let go, and the audience is really watching the grip. But you cannot watch a grip that isn't there. There was no strain in him. His eyes were level and open, and looking at a point somewhere above the back row, and his face was not set. It was simply * at rest *, and the horns went through him the way weather goes through a wall. By minute 4, the laughter had thinned. By minute 5, it was gone. There's a thing that happens to a crowd. I've been in rooms for 10,000 hours, and I have only felt it twice. The energy turns over, like a boat coming about, and suddenly everybody is on the other side of the joke and nobody has said anything to anybody. What was happening? And Odile, with all her genius, was the last person in that building to feel it, was that 1,000 people who had come to watch a statue get broken were now, quietly, in the dark, rooting for the statue *. At 6 minutes 50, a man in the 4th row shouted, "Leave him alone." It came out of nowhere, and it was very loud, and it landed in a gap between horn blasts. For about 2 seconds, nobody knew what to do. And then Odile Vance did the most extraordinary thing, which was to laugh, out loud, genuinely, and turn it. She stood up from her desk with her arms wide and said, "Oh, we've got a * sympathizer *." And the room broke, and she wrote it, and she had them back inside 4 seconds. And I watched a woman save a live broadcast with nothing in her hands but her own nerve, and I thought, God forgive me, she is the best there has ever been. But she'd felt it now. She'd felt the boat turn, and Odile Vance had never in her life responded to losing a room by getting gentler. The clock ran out. The band played the failure sting, 500 crowns unclaimed. And Owain Marsh turned, and marched 6 paces back to the chair, and sat down as though he had been for a short walk in a garden. "Well," said Odile, and there was something new and cold under the warmth of it, "you've won. It isn't a contest, ma'am." "Everything's a contest, Sergeant. That's why they gave you a rifle." The audience laughed *, not like before. "Now," she said. She reached across the desk and pulled a card toward her, and I saw Gerald Pike's head come up in the gallery window because that card was not in the rundown. Let's talk about the money. Here is what she did, and I want to describe it precisely, because for years afterward people got it wrong. They thought she'd insulted him. She didn't. What she did was far, far worse and about 1,000 times cleverer. She put a number on the screen. Not a made-up number, a real one, our researcher's number, asterisk my asterisk number, because I had pulled it from the public accounts in a fortnight of honest work I had been proud of at the time. The annual cost of the ceremonial establishment of the household regiment. It is a large number. Written in white on black, with no context, in a hot studio at 10 o'clock at night, it is an obscene number. And beside it she put another. That, she said, is what we spend on standing still. And that, the small one, the one you can barely see, is what the realm spends on the Guards Benevolent Fund. Which is the charity my guest has come here tonight to plead for. Which pays for the house at Ashfold, where the men who used to stand still now sit, because they can't. The room had gone very quiet. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, said Odile Vance, and leaned her chin on her fist, and looked straight down the barrel of camera 1 at 11 million people, because honesty is the only thing I've got. I look at those two numbers and I do not understand this realm at all. We will spend an asterisk fortune on the show, and we will not pay to keep the men warm afterward. And I think the reason, and I want you to sit with this, I want you to really sit with it. I think the reason is that when they're standing at the gate they're useful to us, aren't they? They're a asterisk photograph asterisk. They're the thing we put on the tin. And the second they can't stand anymore, they stop being a photograph, and then, she snapped her fingers, then they're a asterisk bill asterisk. And she was asterisk right asterisk. That was the horror of it. She was completely, absolutely, blisteringly right, and she said it better than anybody in the regiment had ever managed to say it, and for about 6 seconds I actually thought she's going to do it. She's going to give them the whole show. And then she turned back to Owain Marsh, and she said, "So let's ask them, shall we?" And the poll went up. The graphic hit the screen and the phone lines opened, and the great blue banner rolled across the bottom of 11 million televisions, with the question on it that Sim Auberon had written, and that Gerald Pike had approved at 7 o'clock that evening, and that I had, God help me, seen on a printout and said nothing about. SHOULD the realm keep paying men to stand still. Text yes or no. I heard behind me one of the sound engineers say, "Oh no." Because here is what Odile Vance, in all her genius, had not understood, and what I understood the instant that banner hit, standing behind camera 3 with my clipboard, with my mouth going dry. She thought she was asking the realm to be ashamed of itself. She thought the numbers would shame them into asterisk yes. She thought, and I believe this absolutely, I believed it then and I believe it now, that she was doing the fund a favor in her way, on her terms, by her own crooked lights, that she would humiliate the pageantry and the realm would rise up in guilt and the money would come. But she had spent 25 minutes teaching 1,000 people in a room and 11 million people at home that standing still is a joke. And now she was asking them whether they wanted to pay for it. The first numbers came in at 9:54. They put them on the screen because that was the format and there was no mechanism, at that hour, on live air, for not putting them on the screen. Yes, 19%, no 81%. I looked at the front row. Callum Vey, 89, sat with his medals on his chest and his hands folded on the head of his stick, and he read the screen, and he did not move his face at all. Neville Hart looked at the floor, and Peter Rook in his chair in seat A3 was looking straight at Owain Marsh, who was looking straight ahead, at nothing, in perfect stillness, the way he had been taught to do at 20 years old, while a country he had given his whole life to answered a question about him on a telephone. The percentages were climbing, 82, 83. And Odile Vance, who did not yet know what she had done, spread her hands and said, "Well, the realm has spoken. Sergeant, would you like to say anything in your defense?" And Owain Marsh said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "Nothing at all." And he said, "Not in mine." And we went to the break. 3.5 minutes. That is what a commercial break is. 3.5 minutes, and in a live studio it is chaos, makeup, water, a producer shouting timings, 100 people moving at once. He walked off into the wings and stood against the black wall by the fire door, out of everybody's way, with the bearskin under his arm, and I went and stood next to him because I could not do anything else. "Sergeant, Don't," he said, not unkindly. "Not now. You'll want it later and there won't be anything left of it." The gallery was screaming in my earpiece. Somebody was demanding to know who had signed off the poll wording. Somebody else was saying, with a kind of awe, that the numbers were the biggest live interaction in the history of the network. "They'll cut the appeal," I said. "Sergeant, they'll cut it. If the poll's running at 81, they can't put the tin out at 10 to 11, it'll look. I know what it'll look like." "Then what are you doing?" And Owain Marsh looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not read, and then he said, "Standing here, same as always." Major Finch came through the fire door with his coat over his arm. He had been watching from the hospitality room upstairs, on a monitor, with the network's head of compliance, and I found out later that he had spent the entire blink test standing at parade rest with his hands behind his back, and had not touched the drink they'd poured him. He didn't speak to Marsh. That was the extraordinary thing. He looked at him a long look, and Marsh met it, and something passed between the two of them that had no words in it at all, and Finch gave a very small nod, and Marsh gave one back. Then Finch turned to me. "Miss Coburn, a word." We went 4 steps down the corridor, and he stood with his back to the studio, and his voice very low under the noise. "You've seen the poll." "Yes." "Your program will cut the appeal." "I think so." He looked at the wall. "Do you know what he did in the North Rook, the one in the chair?" "No." "Nor do I, it isn't mine to know." Finch's jaw worked. "Miss Coburn, may I tell you something? Not for the program, not for your notebook, because I think you're the only person in this building who is going to remember it in the morning." "Yes." "When the late Queen Mother lay in state," he said, "the Great Hall was open for 4 days and 3 nights, and the realm queued for it. Do you remember? People stood out in the wet for 11 hours to walk past a box for 9 seconds. "I was there," I said. "I queued." "Then you saw the guards?" "Yes." 4 of them at a time," said Finch. "One at each corner of the catafalque, heads bowed over the rifle, 20 minutes at a stretch and then relieved around the clock for 4 days. 20 minutes is a very long time in that posture at that angle, with the head down and the eyes closed. Men fall. It happens. There's a drill for it, and the drill is that the man goes down and the man beside him does not look, and the relief comes, and the family is not disturbed." He turned and looked at me. "Now, when you walked past, where did you look?" I opened my mouth to answer, and I could not. Because I had queued in the wet for 9 hours when I was 21, and I could remember the sound of the hall, and I could remember the flowers. And what I could remember with total photographic clarity, the thing I had described to people for years afterward, was the 4 men at the corners. The impossible stillness of them, the bowed heads, the way you couldn't quite believe they were breathing. "You looked at them," said Finch. "Everybody looks at them. Every single person who walks through that hall spends their 9 seconds looking at the guards, and that is not an accident, Miss Coburn. That is the asterisk design. That is the oldest thing we do." "I don't understand." "The family sits in the front pews," he said, "for 4 days, widows, sons, sisters, grieving, in front of 100,000 strangers and every camera in the world." And then he said it, quite gently, and put it into me like a nail. Somebody has to be the thing that everybody looks at, so that they don't have to be. The studio floor manager was calling 90 seconds. I stood in that corridor with my ears roaring. Marsh stood that duty, said Finch. All 4 days he was 38. He put his coat over his other arm. On the second night his father drowned. On the ferry at home in the north the river was up. They told him between shifts at 3 in the morning in a corridor about the size of this one. I said, what did he do? He asked how long he had before his relief was due, said Finch. He was told 19 minutes. He said thank you. He went back in and he stood his 20 minutes at the corner of that coffin with his head bowed and 100,000 people looking at him, and not one of them knew, and not one of them will ever know, and he did not miss a single duty in the 2 days that followed. He buried his father on the Sunday. There were 11 people at the graveside. Finch's voice did not change at all. And your program is about to ask him on live television why he thinks the realm ought to pay for his boots. 30 seconds, said the floor manager. Tell her, I said. My voice came out strange. Major, let me tell her. Let me get it to Odile. She doesn't no asterisk if she knew. And Major Aldous Finch looked at me with something that was almost pity. Miss Coburn, he said, how do you imagine she knows about the funeral? I want to be accurate. It matters to me to be accurate, so I did not know at that moment that it was on her cards. I only knew it from Finch's face. I found out for certain 90 seconds later, when I came back onto the studio floor and looked up at the gallery and saw the running order on the wall monitor. And there, under the pole, in the last block before the break, in Sim Auburn's big loopy hand, bury the father, use if he's still standing. 2 words, still standing. Even the joke was a joke. We came back from the break at 10:51, and the poll banner was at no 84% asterisk, and the audience was subdued in the way audiences get when they have laughed too much too early and are starting to feel the hangover. And my earpiece said in Gerald Pike's voice, flat and tired, kill the appeal, we're heavy, straight from the poll to the good nights. And I said into the talkback in front of everybody, you can't. There was a silence on the loop about 2 seconds long. Nell, said Pike, get off the circuit. There's a signed undertaking. The regiment has it in writing, Gerald. Get off the circuit. And at that exact moment, the fire door at the back of the studio opened, and a man in a very good coat came in with a telephone in his hand and asked, in a low, extremely well-bred voice, for Color Sergeant Marsh. He was from the Palace Press Office. His name was Halloran, and he had been sent from a building 2 miles away at a speed, which suggested somebody very senior had watched the pole go up and put down a glass very hard. He got as far as the wings. Marsh was standing there in the dark, waiting for his cue, and Halloran spoke to him for perhaps 40 seconds, quickly and quietly, and I was close enough to hear about half of it. Withdrawing you now. The car's on Marlow Street, you go out through the loading bay. We say nothing, we let it die. No, sir. Sergeant, this is not a asterisk request asterisk. This is coming from. I know where it's coming from, sir. Then you understand that you are being asterisk ordered to. I've 4 minutes owed to the fund, sir, said Owain Marsh, and they're at 10 to 11, and I am going to be sitting in that chair when they come. Halloran said, and I have never heard a man so genuinely at a loss, you are on asterisk live television. In 11 minutes she is going to take your father and put him on a screen. Do you understand what she's going to do to you? And Marsh said, yes, sir. Then why asterisk? Because they'll be watching at Ashfold, he said. And he put the bearskin on his head and squared it, and looked straight ahead at the light. Halloran stood there. He was, I think, a decent man in an impossible job. He said at last quietly, you know I have to log this. You know you'll be on a charge. Yes, sir. Sergeant. With respect, sir, you've a telephone in your hand, said Marsh. The gentleman who sent you can put me under close arrest in the morning, and I'll be there for it, and I'll not say a word in my defense. But I'm not leaving a signed undertaking on the floor of a television studio, and I'm not walking out of here in front of 11 million people as though we've something to be ashamed of." He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice the whole night, not once. "Log it, sir. And then, if you'd be so kind, go and sit down in the back row and watch it." The floor manager's hand came down, and Color Sergeant Owain Marsh marched out into the light for the second time that night. She started with the poll, 84-16. She read it out. Then she said, "Sergeant, I've one more question, and then I'll let you go home. And I want you to know that I'm asking it because I think it's the only honest question left in the building." She squared her cards. "You've been very patient with me tonight," she said. "You have. You've been better than I deserve, and half the country's texted in to say so, and the other half has texted in to say we shouldn't pay you." A small laugh, thin. "But you haven't actually told us anything, have you? I've asked you about the boots, and you told me about the boots. I've asked you about the hat. I've asked you what's hard about it, and you looked at me and you decided not to say." She was leaning in now, and her voice had dropped, and the studio dropped with it. "So here's what I know about you, Sergeant Marsh, and I'll be honest, my researchers are very good." She turned a card over. "6 years ago, the Queen Mother lay in state. You stood at the corner of that coffin, and on the second night of it, your father died at home in the north on the river." I felt the whole room stop breathing. "And you didn't go," said Odile Vance. "You stood your watch. You stayed at your post, and you stood in that hall, and you kept standing still, while they buried your father with 11 people at the graveside." She put the card down. "So my question, and God knows I've earned the right to ask it. We've been at this for an hour. My question is this." She looked at him. The clock in the corner of the screen said 10:57. 11 million households. 1,000 people in a hot, dark room, and 3 of them in the front row in their good jackets, and not a sound anywhere. "What was it for?" said Odile Vance. "One line, that's all. I don't want the speech, I don't want the regiment, I don't want the 400 years. One line from you to 11 million people who have just voted 84-16 that you're not worth the money. Tell them what standing still actually protects. Because from where I'm sitting, Sergeant, it protected nothing. Not a single thing. It didn't protect him." She spread her hands. "One line. And if you haven't got one, then we all know, don't we?" He did not answer straight away. "I have watched the tape more times than any sane person would, and I have timed it, and the gap is 4.5 seconds. On live television, 4.5 seconds is a geological era. Directors have nervous breakdowns over 2. In the gallery, somebody was already reaching for the cut to camera 2. He didn't fill it, that was the thing. Any other man alive would have filled it with a breath, with a swallow, with a shift of weight, with the little wounded blink that tells a studio you got me *. He simply sat, with his hands on his knees and his back off the chair, exactly as he had sat down 40 minutes before, and he let the silence be what it was. And then Color Sergeant Owain Marsh looked at Odile Vance and said, without heat, without hurry, in the flat plain voice of a man giving a range or reading a number off a card, "Madam, we do not stand still for a living. We stand still so the rest of you are free to fall apart, and still find a man on his feet when you're done." And that was all. He didn't explain it. He didn't lean forward. He didn't do the thing every guest in the history of that program has done, which is to hunt in the other person's face for the effect. He said his one line, and then he closed his mouth and sat there, and put his eyes back on the point above the back row, and waited to be dismissed. I said the audience went quiet, and people always assume I mean they stopped laughing. I mean the room stopped working. You have to understand what a studio audience is. It's an instrument. It's 1,000 people who have been warmed up for 40 minutes by a professional, who are seated in a specific arc, who are lit and mic'd and led, and who behave, collectively, like a single animal that has been trained to respond. And for the space of about 10 seconds, that animal simply ceased to exist. There was no rustle, no cough, nobody shifted. 1,000 people sat in a hot, dark room in absolute stillness, and I remember thinking, with a lurch that went right through me, oh, that's what it is. That's what he does. He's just made 1,000 people do it, and now they know what it costs. Camera 3 was on Odile. She did not speak. She had never in 10 years, not once, not in 1,100 and something broadcasts, not when a minister called her a name that got the network fined, not when a man collapsed on her sofa, not the night the lights failed. She had never once been unable to speak. Her mouth was very slightly open. Her hand had stopped halfway to the cards. And her eyes had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere a long way from Studio 4, and everybody watching saw it, all 11 million of them, in unforgiving high definition, because our lighting was superb and I had helped rig it. And in the front row, in the dark, an old man began to get to his feet. Callum Vane was 89 years old, and it took him a very long time. That is what nobody remembers properly, because the clip they play is only 9 seconds and the clip is a lie. It took him the better part of half a minute. He got the stick planted. He got one hand onto the arm of the seat. He got his weight forward and it went wrong, and he had to sit back down and start again. And Neville Hart moved to help him, and Vane said something short to him, and Hart took his hand away. And Callum Vane stood up on his own, in the front row of a television studio, in a blazer with his medals on it, in a room of 1,000 people who had spent the last hour being invited to laugh at the fact that standing up was all he had ever done. And then he came to attention. He was not good at it anymore. That is the other thing the clip does not tell you. His shoulders were wrong and his chin was down and his left hand would not come straight. It did not matter. It has never mattered less. Neville Hart stood up beside him, one hand at the seam of his trousers, the other arm hanging where the hand should be. And Peter Rook, who could not stand and would never stand again, put both hands on the arms of his chair and pushed himself as far up as his body would allow him to go, which was perhaps 4 inches, and held himself there, shaking, in the front row with his chin level. That is when the studio went. Not applause, not at first. It started at the back where the standing room was, and it came forward in a wave, people getting up out of their seats with no idea why they were doing it. No cue, no floor manager, no applause sign. 1,000 people rising in a dark room in silence with their eyes on 3 old soldiers in the front row, and one man sitting very straight in a chair on a stage. And then it broke, and the noise that came out of that building was not the noise of an audience. I have heard applause. That was not applause. That was 1,000 people trying to give something back and having no way to do it, and using their hands because their hands were all they had. It went on for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, on live television, in the last 5 minutes of a 90-minute broadcast, with a hard out at 11 o'clock for the news. In my earpiece I could hear the gallery, and what the gallery was saying over and over in the voice of Gerald Pike was, "Don't cut, don't cut. Nobody cut anything, stay on it." She stood up. She did it while the noise was still going, and I watched Sim Auberon put both hands flat on the desk in the writer's box, because a host does not stand up. There is nowhere for a host to go. The whole grammar of the program is that she is behind the desk, and the world comes to her. Odile Vance came out from behind the desk and walked around it, and stood in front of it in the light, with the audience on their feet in front of her, and she pulled the microphone off her lapel and held it in her hand like a woman who has just remembered what one is for. She waited for them to stop. It took a while, she didn't hurry them. And when it was quiet, she said, and her voice was not the voice she used on that program. It was lower and flatter and about 10 years older. "I want to tell you something, and I've got about 4 minutes, and I've never said it out loud." She looked at the floor, then she looked up. "My mother died on a Sunday in the spring, 9 years ago, in a hospital about a mile from this building. And on the Wednesday I stood on that mark." She pointed at the tape on the floor, the same mark, the one he'd stood on for the blink test. "And I did 11 minutes of material about a minister's haircut, and it was some of the best work I have ever done in my life, and you laughed until you could not breathe, and not one of you knew. Nobody in that studio made a sound. And I did it again on Thursday, and on Friday I did it, and on Saturday, and I buried her on the Monday morning, and I was on this stage on the Monday night, and I was asterisk funny." She took a breath. "And I have been so proud of that, for 9 years. I have told that story to exactly 2 people, and both times I told it like it was a joke asterisk, like it was iron, like it was asterisk professional asterisk." She turned slowly and looked at Owain Marsh, who was sitting in the guest chair with his hands on his knees, looking back at her, and there was nothing in his face but attention. "I have stood still for a living," said Odile Vance, "for 9 years, and I never had a word for it. And I have hated it, and I have hated myself asterisk for being able to do it, and I did not know why. And tonight I sat here and I made 1,000 people laugh at a man who does the same thing I do, except that he does it for somebody else." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, roughly, like a woman getting rid of an inconvenience, and she did not apologize for it. "That's the difference. I have just worked it out live at 4 minutes to 11 in front of 11 million people, and I'd like it on the record. When I hold myself together, I do it so that nobody sees me asterisk." She looked out at the room. "When he does it so that everybody looks at asterisk him." And her voice cracked once on the last word, and she let it. "So that the woman in the front pew doesn't have to be looked at for 4 days, while she buries her mother." She stopped. Then she turned to camera 1, and I saw her find it. And I saw her square her shoulders the way she did before a monologue, and I understood that she was about to do something that would end a career or make one, and that she did not, at that moment, care in the slightest which. "There is a poll on your screens," she said. "I wrote it. It says, should the realm keep paying men to stand still? It is the worst question I have ever asked in my life, and I am ashamed of it, and I want it asterisk off my program." The banner vanished. "Here's the number instead." She held out her hand without looking, and I ran. I actually ran across a live studio floor and shot. You can see me on the tape. A girl of 27 in a headset skidding into frame, and I put the appeal card in her hand. "The Guards Benevolent Fund," said Odile Vance. "It keeps a house at Ashfold, 81 men. It pays for the fires and the physicians and the chairs and the burials, and this year, for the first time in 140 years, it will not meet its costs, and the Treasury has said no, because the Treasury pays for things that people can asterisk see asterisk." She held the card up. "That's the number. It'll stay on the screen until they throw us off the air, and then it'll be on the screen again tomorrow, and the night after, and every night this year, because I own this hour and I have just decided what it's asterisk for asterisk." She put the card down on the desk. "And there are 3 men in my front row," she said, "who stood still for 40 years so that you and I could have the kind of country where a woman like me is allowed to be rude about it on the television." She turned and looked at them. "Ve, Hart, Rook. Gentlemen, I have been a disgrace tonight, and you were courteous to me, and I want you to know that I know the difference." And Callum Vey, 89, still on his feet, still at his ruined attention, said, and the boom caught it, clear as a bell, in 11 million rooms. "That's quite all right, madam. We're used to being stood at." And the studio broke. A great roar of it, laughter and applause and something in between that has no name. And Odile Vance put her face in her hands and laughed until she had to hold on to the desk. And the credits ran 9 minutes late, and the network let them, and the 11 o'clock news went out at 8 minutes past. She never sat back down behind that desk, not that night. She did the goodnight standing on the studio floor, next to the guest chair, with her hand resting on the back of it. The fund's telephone line took its first call at 4 minutes past 11, and its last at 20 to 6 the following evening, at which point the exchange failed physically and had to be replaced. I am not going to give you the total. It was reported everywhere and you can look it up, and the number is not the point, and Owain Marsh would think it vulgar of me. I will tell you only that it was more than the fund's entire endowment, that it arrived in sums of between 2 crowns and a great many, that 11,000 of the gifts came with a note, and that the notes were nearly all the same note in different handwriting. For the man at the corner. My father's funeral 9 years ago, I never knew why I looked at him. Now I do. I queued in the rain. I remember the 4 of them. I am sorry it took me this long. The regiment refused, at first, to release the money to the house at Ashfold until the accounting had been done properly, because they are exactly the kind of men who would, and it took Princess Adela 3 days and a phone call of some warmth to get them to accept that the realm had made up its mind. She came to Ashfold on the Friday. No press, she was firm about that, and the 2 photographers who turned up were sent away by a corporal with a politeness so total it was almost violent. She sat in the hall with the stove going and had tea with 81 men, and she stayed 4 hours, which was 3.5 longer than her diary allowed, and she went round every room. I was there because Neville Hart had telephoned the studio and asked for the girl who ran across the floor, and I had gone up on the morning train. The princess found me in the corridor by the physiotherapy room, and she knew exactly who I was, and she said, "You're Miss Coburn." "Ma'am." "You wrote the poll." There was no possible answer to that. I stood there with my ears burning, 27 years old, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And the segment, it was my note in the meeting. Princess Adela looked at me for a long moment. "Good," she said. "Then you'll know what to do with the rest of it." And she went on down the corridor, and that is the entire conversation, and I have organized 11 years of my life around it. There was a charge. People forget that. The clip does not show it and nobody puts it in the retrospectives, but on the Thursday morning color Sergeant Owain Marsh reported himself, in his own words, to the regimental sergeant major, and stated that on the night of the broadcast, he had received a lawful order from a representative of the palace to withdraw from the studio, and had declined it, and that he wished the matter recorded. Dunstan Care, who was built like a cathedral door and who had watched the program in his kitchen with his wife, and had not, by his own account, said a word for 20 minutes afterward, is said to have replied, "Yes, Color Sergeant, I imagine you do." It went up. It kept going up. There is a point in every institution at which a piece of paper stops being a discipline matter and becomes a question about what the institution is asterisk, and this one reached that point somewhere around Tuesday. King Alaric heard it himself, in person, which is not usual and which was the first sign anybody had of what he intended. I was not in the room. Major Finch was, and he told me about it years later at his retirement, with the freedom of a man who no longer has an office to protect. The king asked for the order to be read out, exactly as it was given. Halloran gave it, honestly and without shading it, and Finch said afterward that he thought rather better of Halloran for the rest of his life. Then the king asked Marsh whether the account was correct. "Yes, sir." "You were ordered to leave the building." "Yes, sir." "And you did not leave." "No, sir." "Why not?" And Marsh said there were 4 minutes owed, sir. King Alaric, who is not a warm man, and who has been described in the press as a filing cabinet with a crown on it, and who has never once been photographed laughing, is reported to have sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for some considerable time. Then he said, "The order was given by a man in an office." The sergeant was standing at a post. I have been king for a number of years, and I have never yet heard of an office that beat a post." He looked down. "The charge is dismissed. The order is expunged. Sergeant Marsh, I am told that you consider yourself due a punishment, and I find that I agree with you, and so I have decided upon one." Marsh, Finch said, did not move a muscle. "You will remain," said King Alaric, "at your duty for the remainder of your service. You will not be promoted out of it to a desk, which is what my staff have been recommending to me all week, and you will not be sent about the realm to be photographed. You will stand at the gate." He picked up his pen. "You will find, I think, that it is the worst thing I could possibly have done to you. Try to bear it." And Owain Marsh said, "Sir," and that was the end of it. The coat rack arrived at Ashfold in November, in a crate, with the bearskin and the scarlet jacket still on it, and a note in Odile Vance's enormous scrawl. "He's a disgrace, he never listens, and he's yours now. I've told him where he's going, and he took it very well. O.V." They put him in the front hall by the door. 81 men hang their coats on Sergeant's stick. They have done for 11 years. He has been redressed twice, promoted 3 times by acclamation, and once, briefly, court-martialed by Neville Hart for insubordination over a scarf. Callum Vey used to salute him every morning on the way to breakfast, on principle, until the morning he didn't come down, which was in his 93rd year in his sleep, with the fire still going. There were 400 people at his graveside. There would have been 11 once. Odile Vance did not become a saint. I want to be very clear about that, because there is a version of this story that gets told at award dinners in which she is redeemed, and it is a lie, and she'd have hated it more than any of us. She went back on the air on the Monday, and she was savage and hilarious, and she took a cabinet minister apart over a housing bill, and she made a joke about a bishop that got questions asked in the assembly. She never mentioned her mother again in public, not once, in the 8 years she had left on that program. When people asked her about that night, and they asked her constantly, for the rest of her life she would say, "I got beaten by a better broadcaster," and change the subject, and if they pushed she would look at them in a way that ended the evening. But the appeal card stayed on the screen at the end of every single broadcast. Every night. For 8 years. She never said what it was for. She just let it sit there for 4 seconds in the credits, in silence with the band down, and the realm learned what it meant. And she never used a live poll again. I asked her about that, once, in a corridor, years afterward, when I was no longer junior anything. "They're not questions, Nell," she said, without stopping. "They're an invitation to be your worst self, and I hand it out to 11 million people at a time, and I get to keep my hands clean." She pushed through the door. "I asked that country whether it wanted to pay for its own dignity, and it said asterisk no asterisk, and I've never got over it. Neither should you. I left the show in the spring. I did not leave in a temper. I did not resign in the corridor, and I did not write a letter about my conscience, which is what I had imagined doing and which would have been about me. I finished my contract. I did my job, and I did it well. And on the last day Gerald Pike shook my hand and said, 'You were right and I was wrong, and I have thought about it every day.' And then he cried, because he cried at everything, and I have loved him ever since. I went and made a program called Asterisk, the Standing Hour Asterisk. It goes out once a year, on the anniversary, live for 1 hour, and it has no host and no desk and no jokes. It is an hour of people telling the realm what somebody once did for them, quietly, at a cost, without being asked. It is not a rating success. It has never been a rating success. It runs every year because the network will not be the organization that cancels it, and I have made that very difficult for them on purpose, and I intend to go on making it difficult for the rest of my working life. The fund is fine. It will be fine for a century. Ashfold has a new wing and a lift that works, and Peter Rook runs the place now. He took the manager's post 9 years ago, and he is a tyrant about the accounts, and the men adore him. And there is a plaque in the hall that does not mention the program, or Odile Vance, or me, and I am glad of that. It says only the 81 names that were in the house that night. And Owain Marsh went back to the gate. That is the ending, and I know it is not the ending people want. They want the medal and the balcony and the king's hand on his shoulder. What he got was exactly what he asked for and exactly what he was given. He stood at his post for another 6 years, and then he took his pension, and he went north, and he runs a ferry across the Wen, where his father did, and he will not talk about any of it ever to anybody, including me. I have been to see him twice. Both times he made tea and asked about my work and told me nothing. But I went down to the palace on the anniversary, the first year, because I could not help myself. It was raining, in the flat gray way it does in that city in the autumn, and the tourists were 4 deep along the railings with their phones up, and the men stood their posts in the wet with the water running off the fur. And a young couple beside me were laughing at them, not cruelly, the way everybody does, the way I did at 21 on my way to queue for 9 hours in the rain for the privilege of looking at 4 bowed heads and not knowing, for another 6 years, what I was looking at. The girl said, "It's mad, isn't it? Imagine just standing there." And I found that I could not speak, that I stood at the railings with the rain coming off my hood and my throat shut, and I could not tell her, because it takes an hour to tell, and she would not have thanked me for it, and because I have never in 11 years found a way to put it as well as he did in a single sentence at 4 minutes to 11 at night. So I will put it here instead, and then I will stop. They are not standing there for nothing. They are standing there so that when it comes for you, and it will come for you, it came for me, it came for him, you are allowed to go to pieces. You are allowed to be a wreck in a front pew with 100,000 strangers walking past, and shake, and not manage it and put your face in your hands because the looking has been taken care of. Somebody is holding the room. Somebody has been up since 4:30 and has done his boots and has put on a coat that weighs what it weighs and has gone out and made himself into the thing that everybody stares at so that nobody stares at you. And when you are finished and you lift your head and you look up, he will still be there. That's the whole of it. That is what the joke was about. I wrote "break him on air" in blue ink, and I underlined it twice, and I have kept the notebook.